Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar titled Lessons Learned, Manufacturing Resiliency and Supply Chain Agility in the Age of COVID-19. The webinar today is presented by IQMS Delmia Works and hosted by Metal Forming Magazine. My name is Brad Kuvan. I'm the editorial director at Metal Forming at PMA, and I'm pleased to be today's moderator. Before we get started, just a few notes about today's go-to meeting session. The meeting is being recorded for archiving, and the recorded event will be posted to our website within the next day or two. We'll let you know via email when that recording is available for viewing online and sharing with others. Also, it's important to know that all the participants in the meeting are in listen-only mode, so that means that the speaker and other attendees will not be able to hear any audio from your site during the program. However, you do have the ability to communicate with us throughout the program by submitting your questions and comments using the question box, which is located in the right-hand control panel on your GoToMeeting screen. Simply type your question to an organizer as selected from the drop-down menu. You'll use that same question panel to then ask questions of our speakers at the end of today's presentation. So we'll go ahead and begin the webinar, which is a case study on how one metal former has leveraged its ERP platform to make operational and supply chain changes quickly in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic without missing a beat in day-to-day operations. Our speaker is Jeff Hohlfeldt. He's Vice President at Northern Industrial Manufacturing, and he's going to discuss some of his company's recent efforts to digitally connect to suppliers, customers, and employees, transmit supply chain transactions electronically, enhance its production schedule to reduce human-to-human interaction, and ensure compliance with some of the new workforce safety regulations that are out there. To introduce Jeff and to also help explain how ERP systems enable supply chain resiliency and agility is Tim Burke. Tim is the Vice President of Strategic Accounts at Delmia Works. So please welcome Tim Burke and Jeff Hohlfeldt.
Awesome. Thanks, Brad. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Again, Tim Burke with Delmia Works, formerly IQMS. I appreciate all you who took the time to join us this afternoon. You look at 2020, I think all you can say is wow, right? I mean, we started off out of the gates in January with, manufacturing humming. I think the prospects of a solid and incredible 2020 were within grasp of everyone, probably on this call. And then our world's just turned upside down, right? I happened to be at the time at the PMA forming our future leadership conference, which was in beautiful Honolulu, Hawaii, in March. And we saw the first signs, I guess, probably the second week we were out there. And I don't mean to rub that in. We're blessed to be out there 2 weeks. I know vacation just seems like a very distant opportunity now. But the first signs we saw were the shelves were clearing, right? We saw signs for, no toilet paper and limits on hand sanitizers and bleach and everything else. And so, many of us found ourselves as supply chain managers, totally thrust into that role based on what was happening all around us. So, I think we found some interesting things along the way, and we're going to share some of those today. So we're going to look back and reflect on what happened as well as, what we learned along the way to help us kind of be better positioned as we go forward. So as Brad mentioned, joining me today is Jeff Hohlfeldt, the VP of Northern Industrial Manufacturing. We'll get into his case study here in just a second, but let's go ahead and slide through and just kind of share some of the observations that we had from our perspective as well. So, all of a sudden March came and everyone was forced to work out of their homes, right? Manufacturing got shut down, at least for a short term, if you were considered non-essential. And we all had to figure out how to react and make the best use of the tools that we had. Shop floor folks were difficult to get into your facilities. We know because of even some of the stimulus money that was presented by the government that sat on top of unemployment. So my daughter, in fact, works for a tech placement company here in Michigan, and her whole role was to try to get people back into the plants. So she was in the process of negotiating with those companies that were looking to get the workers inside their facilities at a higher rate than they had previously been paid. So that kind of, resonates a point right there, is that, as we've gone through this process, there have been additional costs that manufacturers have incurred, whether it's labor, whether it's additional PPE equipment, whether it's, thermal imaging or whatever technologies you have to deploy in the plant to make it safe according to the government guidelines. So again, an ERP system kind of really rises up again, how do we go after bigger margins and better margins? And unfortunately, we can't raise our prices all the time, but we have to figure out how to cut costs and be more efficient, right? So those are some of the things that we'll be looking at today. One of the interesting moves we saw from some of these larger organizations, and again, some of these big companies, because, if you look at where technology has gone over the years, the larger organizations really have embraced the technology, probably more so than the smaller manufacturers out there. And so many of these organizations, certainly the General Motors and the Louis Vuittons and the Tito's and Dysons and all these folks have systems built in that allow them to be, nimble and to react in an efficient in an agile way. And we saw things like, Bauer Hockey kind of shifting from, making hockey helmets to making face shields, right? Not a big stretch, but something that they looked amongst themselves, given the tooling and the business that they had, how could they help in this pandemic? Airbnb, I know they switched from, housing vacation type properties to providing housing for first responders and medical folks. So that was a shift in their business model as well. And then we all know, the General Motors and the Fords and the Teslas out there looked at the parts that they had in their manufacturing operations and found that, most of the parts that they needed to build respirators and ventilators were on premise. So they quickly retooled and filled orders very rapidly for the government for those specific orders. So, lots of ways that these organizations responded, and I'm sure yours had some interesting pivots as well. When we talk to many companies, smaller organizations, typically we find that they focus their automation initially on the finance side of the house, right? You got to be able to get invoices out, you got to be able to get paid, you have to be able to pay vendors. So, a strategy of deploying something like Quickbooks, for example, is a pretty natural progression. Some of the smaller manufacturers also use things like Excel spreadsheets and Access databases. And in some cases, I've worked with companies who've really gone out and kind of created their own ERP system that perhaps Joel in the IT department has built and programmed and now supports. And so some of these companies have actually dipped their toe in, and they felt, the advantages of having systems that allow them to be nimble and agile. But as they've grown, they realize that, they may need a more commercial, viable product that's, able to be supported in the event that Joel takes off and moves on and leaves the organization, right? So it's some of these features that these folks look for are things like automated workflows and alert systems. When conditions change, how can the system tell me that something happened, right? The whole idea of a paperless environment going to a document control system, and if you're in a regulated environment, to have electronic signature capability, right? Manufacturers also want to have traceability on their components that they're building. They want to know what raw materials were sourced for those finished good materials, where those products were sent in the event of a recall or any quality issues down the road. And in many cases, some of their customers are requiring that of them. The other thing, too, that many of these companies look for are certainly the ability to be very agile with regard to scheduling their plants and planning not only labor, but machine time as well. So these are some of the things that we've seen kind of on the wish list, if you will. This screen right here really kind of represents a couple of things. We've got a marketing leader inside of Delmia Works who was searching for a picture that really represented the eyes and the ears in manufacturing. And so this is what he kind of came up with. He found this beautiful pup out there. But, the thought really continues is that, if you don't know what's happening inside your four walls, you can't react to it, right? And so you need systems these days to assist with that process. So again, supply chain resiliency in the face of unplanned events. And again, we've had so many unplanned events in 2020. But again, as you go down to some of these bullets here, these are some of the tools that some of these organizations are seeking. Schedule changes, right? Constant changes. We saw things and we've heard things depending upon what industries you support, where if, for example, you were a medical supplier, that, we saw that elective surgeries and procedures, kind of got stalled out, right? So if you were supplying for those, consumables for those various procedures, your business really wasn't moving much, right? Because inventory kind of sat at the hospitals and the supply chain slowed. As the months progressed, things changed, right? And so there was a definite whipsaw of what forecast for production was going to be from your customers, and the ability to react to that and to be able to source the materials that you need to build the products that you make just became exponentially more difficult, right? Supply chains were shut down, transportation was shut down, different states were operating differently, different countries were operating differently. So a whole mess of things that kind of came into play. So, looking at your organization, trying to figure out where best to apply people and resources and machines, you have to have the capability to do some what-if scenarios and some planning, right? Whiteboard capability, capacity planning, how to react quickly to an impending issue from a customer or perhaps a supplier. Again, we saw forecast changes, kind of swing up and down based on EDI signals from, particularly in automotive. We know automotive plants shut down for a long time. And then all of a sudden they came back with bigger, right? I mean, some of the hot models, the trucks, the new trucks that are out, you can't build them quick enough. I think the Corvette is the same way. And, obviously certain models move quicker than others. But those are the types of things that they're unexpected. You don't realize they're coming at you that you have to respond to. And so, having a system that manages that process for you is invaluable. Other issues that we see out there, again, we talked about this before, the ability of the system to really notify you when things are going amok, right? Whether it's an email alert for a critical production issue, whether it's a workflow from a design perspective, from an engineering process, where you don't physically have to be inside the same four walls to get an approval on a drawing that you can forward electronically, to either your customer or internally. Document control has seemed to really rise as far as going paperless and not having the dependency of walking a file folder down to the office. That now you can do all this stuff remote, right? And the tools and the capabilities are there today to really have continuous process improvements on your business. And then even the financial analysis, right? I mean, you have to understand where money's going and where it's coming from, and the profitability of your products, right? I mean, I've seen and talked to many customers out there that they have hunches and they suspect some products are doing better than others, but they just don't know all the time. And if you don't have a system that really captures those costs, the cost of the machines and the cost of labor, you don't have a good handle on where your money's going or where it's coming in. So again, those are good areas for continuous improvement inside your four walls. All right. I'm going to now introduce Mr. Jeff Hohlfeldt, who is the Vice President of Northern Industrial Manufacturing. Jeff will share with us some of the experiences that he's seen and that Northern Industrial Manufacturing has seen over the past several months. And I'm delighted to introduce Jeff to you today. So, Jeff, I will pass the baton to you, my friend.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Tim. Again, this is Jeff Hohlfeldt, Vice President of Northern Industrial Manufacturing. And I'm going to just run you through a little bit of what we've seen on the Northern Industrial side. So Northern Industrial Manufacturing is a Tier 1 automotive and heavy truck supplier. We're located in Harrison Township, Michigan, which is right outside of Detroit. And about 95% of our business lies within that auto heavy truck space. And being in Michigan, probably similar to a lot of other companies across other states, for the months of March, April, and May, many of those months and days, we were physically forced to be shut down. So we were in an area where we were quite literally making zero revenue, and that was a very stressful time, because it's probably the only time really in the company's history where you're operating and you've got those overhead costs and things of that nature without getting any revenue on the inbound side. Luckily for us, however, kind of June, July, and August, even here into September, we've seen a really robust recovery in the markets in which we serve. I would say it's pretty safe to say that we're well over 100% back to where we were pre-COVID. And I think the reason behind that is you're seeing a lot of the inventory levels at the OEMs in those auto and heavy truck spaces have deteriorated almost down to zero, because they were in a similar boat, being shut down. They weren't able to replenish their pipelines, build trucks, build cars and SUVs. And the consumers, although down, were still buying cars, trucks, and SUVs in areas of the country or the world that were still open. And so without being able to back flush that pipeline, you now have a situation where you've got the demand starting to come back with the supply being limited, and that leads to a situation where all of the suppliers become busy. Next slide. So a little bit about what we do. We're a traditional stamper, but we also have in-house grinding, deburring, media finishing, color coding, heat set, as well as a few other internal operations, just trying to control our own supply chain as best we can. We manufacture shims and thrust washers, and our stamping presses are monitored with what are called real time, and it allows us to have visibility of what's running and when. And then some of the ERP, and ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning. Some of the critical modules that we've chosen to adopt are the Electronic Data Interchange, or EDI ASN capabilities, the quality and SPC portion, where we're able to retain and document information for outgoing material that's going to the customer, as well as data and document control and preventative maintenance. And I'll talk a little bit about those as we go further. But one of the things that might not be all that unique about us is we don't have any formal in-house IT staff. I'm able to manage the entire enterprise pretty much with one or two people. Those people, are also in charge of various things like sales and customer service. So we don't really have that IT staff. And what was nice about being able to be on an ERP system is that it requires it requires maintenance, obviously, for the system, but in terms of IT capabilities, it's actually a lot easier on us, because you don't have a variety of bolt-on systems that all have to be updated. Everything pretty much flows together. And then we are able to use tablets and a variety of different other technologies on our shop floor that really enable our users to interface very effectively with the ERP system. And then maybe similar to many on this call is all of these systems are then subject to the IATF and ISO 14001 compliance and quality requirements. Being an auto supplier, we're forced into being able to adhere to those IATF regulations. Next slide. So how have things changed? And boy, have they changed. So in terms of how we're able to, try to release the resiliency of our employees, we've had to try to make sure we're accommodating our employees in a variety of different ways. Obviously, safety, being in a manufacturing facility, is always key. We've got to keep our employees safe and healthy. And so there's been a variety of different things that we've had to do. And one of the things we've had to do, and we're just in terms of talking about it now, is shift and schedule changes. So all of a sudden, we had this very common shift change where you've got a lot of people clocking in and out, and they're doing so at the same time. Well, obviously, it's very hard to social distance when you're all gathered around the time clock. And so we've had to try to do our best to try to shift some of these things around, as well as with lunches and breaks and whatnot, keeping break rooms closed, having, unfortunately, closing refrigerators and dealing with things like that, all to keep employees safe. The other thing that we've done is we've instilled a temperature scan for employees before they come into the facility. In addition to the temperature scans, we've also asked that they fill out a various form that basically says, well, I'm not sick, I haven't been exposed, things like that. And you'd be surprised how many people have actually come in and checked the box. Well, yeah, my, son or daughter is sick. Well, geez, I'm glad you let us know. Thanks for your honesty, but we can't have you come in because obviously that could expose other employees. So it's different things like that. And then getting our employees separated with different types of techniques, whether it be just moving machines around, or whether it be maybe not necessarily moving machines around, but moving where the employee would stand with the machine, as well as physical barricades that would keep employees distant from each other. And then the other thing that for us was a little bit of a struggle is work from home options. We're a relatively small company. We don't have a large sales force or things of that nature. And so for us, something as simple as, okay, our quality manager wants to work from home. How do we make that happen? How do we get that laptop configured so that we're secure, so that we're not exposing the company to malware and other types of viruses, and getting that going. And then obviously increased sick days, being kind of on high alert. If there's any inkling that an employee is not feeling well or has a member of the family that's sick, you lose that employee for a day or two until things can get figured out, whether it be temperature monitoring, COVID test, etc. And so manning and labor has been quite a challenge. So how are we able to try to leverage some of this labor and capacity? And one of the things is we've really leveraged our ERP system. We use IQMS at Delemia Works, and we've really been able to kind of leverage the technology to help us understand what's happening in the plant. And not only does this technology allow us to be able to effectively monitor what's going on, but it also eliminates necessarily the need to engage with other people. I mean, you hate to say that, but in the post-COVID condition, you can no longer have those 7, 8, 9-person meetings where you're going through different data points, different scheduling, different things going on in the plant. You've got to kind of try to do it either remotely or in a circumstance like we're on now, where you're doing it in a webinar or a WebEx. And so what we do is we get a report that comes from the system that basically says, okay, the system wants to have, in the first case, 50 to 60,000 pieces. Well, how many do we currently have in inventory? This says it's got 40,000 pieces, so therefore we're 10,000 short. And then what it also does is it causes a priority list. So now the hundreds of SKUs that in a traditional environment that our plant manager would quite literally have to manage in their head, we now have those hundreds of part numbers dwindled down to, in this case, this was, it looks like 2 or 3 weeks ago, but down to 12 or 13 part numbers that are hot, and then under them, we've got enough, but might be time to start producing. And so that can be done really with the click of a few buttons, and away you go. Next slide. What we've also done too to that also helps us kind of eliminate the need for the personal interaction. And again, we still are talking. It's not like you eliminate it altogether. But before we implemented Delmia Works, our plant manager and our production supervisors, they used to pretty much schedule every job after the job before it was created. So the operator would have a job, maybe 2 to produce, and then after that job was produced, the operator would show up to the plant manager or production supervisor and say, okay, I did job XYZ, and now I'm ready for my next one. Well, you can imagine, especially in this age, having that constant turn of your employees walking through the plant, coming in, having meetings, sitting down. It really creates a little bit more level of risk to the business, because if one person gets COVID or gets sick, the amount of interactions obviously increases greatly if you're having that amount of need to be filled in. And so luckily, we had implemented this strategy within Delmia Works that our supervisors can plan out the jobs much longer in advance. So you can see here on the right, one of our work centers, G2. This would just be a typical snapshot of what the supervisor could be able to schedule. And instead of it being 1 or 2 jobs, you can see here there's 10 or 12 jobs. And what's nice about this is not only does it make the time more effective for our top line managers, it makes the time more effective for our operators, but then it also allows a streamlined production reporting. You can notice that there's a barcode. And what we've done is, by implementing using barcodes, not only does this act as the schedule for everybody to see the same thing and to be able to be operating on the same data points, but once the job is finished, you can use this to start production reporting. And this has really been pretty game-changing for us, because at that production reporting level, and I'll go into it shortly, there's opportunities for production reporting at the point of production that affects ultimately your inventory positions. And so what we have here, this would be a typical production report from a shift. So all of these are jobs that are being production reported. And what happens at the production reporting stage is there's a label that's created that acts like a traveler. And so the traveler, I think most manufacturing organizations are pretty familiar with that terminology, but basically a traveler is identification that follows the job for the life of the job. And our particular traveler, we like to call a smart traveler, because it's got these barcodes on it so that they can be picked up by a scanner. And so what happens now is we've got circumstances where you might have, let's say, 12 different bill of materials or 12 different steps in our manufacturing process. Those 12 steps all need to be inventoried, they need to be production reported, they need to have correct lot numbers, correct quantities, things of that nature. Well, traditionally what was happening when we were in our old kind of pre-Delmia Works state is everything would be handwritten. And so a typical lot number would be, you can see there, 03148-C2. Well, what was happening in many cases, it's like the telephone game. If you can't quite read what someone wrote as the lot number, maybe the C2 looked like a C7. Well, all of a sudden, at bill of material number 5, somebody thought it was a 7, and you've got bill of material 1 through 5 being a C2, and then after that, it's a C7. And this was creating a lot of chaos. It was really affecting our employees' time and efforts, because they then the quality department would have to track it down. Well, we were able to eliminate, I would say, over 95% of our errors by moving to these barcodes. Very rarely, the operator at bill of material 1, which is where the lot number is entered, if that operator at the first stage puts the wrong lot number in, that one has to be manual. That's where the systems just defining where the lot number is, it's wrong the whole time. And what's nice about that is, even though it's wrong, quality can change it at one spot, and it's right throughout the whole thing. So for us, that's really been game changing in eliminating mistakes, eliminating time, and streamlining our operations. Next slide. The other thing that we've been able to do is look at efficiencies. So like many of you right now, for us, equipment utilization and labor capacity is super critical. We're having a real hard time getting labor in, and because of that, you really got to try to make the most out of the labor you have that day. And so for us, the technology has enabled us to be able to identify those critical flow paths that we need to make sure we're optimizing. And it does it very nice and graphically. It allows us to look at press levels, at different inventory turns. There's a variety of different reports that you can do that allow you to measure that performance, and it allows you to measure it based on where you want to be. Next slide. The other nice thing that we've done is we've implemented what's called real-time production monitoring. And what's nice about this is it uses the signal coming off of our equipment. So in this case, our press room, we've got a variety of presses, a variety of different tonnages, and at any given time, our plant manager, who's also scheduling this equipment, can log in and see at any given time what presses are going up and down. In the old days, how we did this was quite literally using video cameras. So the plant manager's got a bunch of cameras right there in his office, and if he asks a person out in the shop, an associate out on our plant floor, hey, can you get this press up and running to me by 2:30? Well, at 2:34, the plant manager could look on the video screen to see, okay, well, is that press going up and down? I can't tell. Now I'm going to have to go back there and see if it's running. Well, now all of that's streamlined because the plant manager can hop on and see right away, oh, okay, yeah, not only is that going up and down, but wow, he's already ran 1,500 pieces. He must have not got it up at 2:30. It must have been engaged well before 2:30 because I've already got half the amount of pieces that I need for the day. That's great news. And so getting that data without having to go out to the plant floor, without having the plant floor needing to report to the management team, it allows for that seamless communication, again, without necessarily having to have a meeting or go out into the plant and see that. Next slide. So a little bit about lessons learned. I think if you took a poll amongst our employees, and I don't think, I know, how many of them would like to go back to the old way of doing business before we implemented our ERP system, DelmiaWorks, 0.0% of them would raise their hand and ask to go back. Because one of the things that we've learned is that really, if you can take care of kind of the nuts and bolts of doing business, the basic production reporting, the inventory planning, the inventory scheduling, the raw material inbound, the labels, and all of the customer-related documents, packing slips, invoicing, bill of ladings, if all of that can be handled in one seamless system, it really allows the organization to make these adjustments under unplanned circumstances. And so having that ability to be able to see inventory without running out into the warehouse and checking, or to see presses going up and down without having to be in the room in which they're going up and down, really has led us and our organization to be really primed for not only good growth, but for safe and great opportunities to pounce on different things that come through the pipeline. And then it also allows us to deal with uncertainty, because if we can control kind of the peaks and valleys of our production, it allows us to be in a much less stressed environment. So the kind of the story I tell is, before implementing the Delmia Works solution, our production looked very, very much like a bunch of triangles, on a board, where we'd overproduce so that we wouldn't have to produce for a while, and then we'd end up going all the way down the mountain, and we'd be out of parts, and then we'd have to overproduce, and this turbulent type of production led to many inefficiencies, and it really streamlined it doesn't streamline the manufacturing operation, so that you're really losing a lot of capacity, and you're not able to react as quick, and everybody's just a lot more stressed, and it's not a good environment. So we're really happy that we were able to eliminate a lot of the issues and a lot of the struggles that we were having, and it's allowed us to increase our capacity and flexibility. And then just being able to monitor the manufacturing operations, whether from home or whether from an office, to be able to have that information at your fingertips without having to ask a whole bunch of people what's needed and where things stand has just been invaluable. And we owe that all to our ERP system, and having that ability. Data in this world is key, and the quicker you can get to good, solid data is the quicker that a manufacturer can make good, solid decisions on where to lead their organization. And so with that, I guess we'll open it up to any questions that anybody might have.
All right. Thank you very much, Tim and Jeff. Very insightful presentation. So go ahead and use the question panel on your GoToMeeting panel if you want to ask these guys some questions. So I guess we'll start with you, Jeff. On that production monitoring, since that was the last thing that you kind of focused on there, I'm interested to hear more about that. So you're accessing that data over the internet, right? So you can access that through a phone or an iPad, that kind of thing. And so how are you using the ERP system to kind of digest the data coming from that production monitoring system?
Yeah, so we use it in a variety of different ways. The primary way we're using it, I was kind of alluding to it a little bit, is the plant manager can kind of look in to see what's running. We're not as maybe elaborate as many other suppliers are, where the system is doing a lot of auto placing, but certainly the system's capable of that. We've just elected not to do it. So for us, we're primarily just monitoring. So for example, if my plant manager knew he wanted to get 12,000 pieces out today, for example, it's 2:40, closing time's at 3:30, he might be popping on there right now to say, hey, where are we at? Are we around 10 or 11,000, or are we short? If we're short, we might need to run tomorrow. If we're close, maybe we'll run a few more. So that's how we primarily use it. But many other organizations have taken it even one step further, where everything's relatively seamless, that once you finish that job, it actually triggers the next job. It triggers the setup person for the next job to come in and get the next job set up while that last job is sort of finishing. We haven't decided to go that far just yet, but certainly that's one way of doing it.
Right. Tim, do you have any comment on how the ERP system can complement this kind of Internet of Things approach?
Yeah, I was just going to make the comment that visually, and Jeff, you mentioned that your plant managers and your production folks look at the the screen that we're viewing today, and there's different colors on there, right? So the colors tell us things too, and often I see the production folks really looking for exceptions, right? If things are running their way they're supposed to, they're in green, right? Everything is good. If things are running fast, I think you get a black signal, right? If things are slow, I think you get some red. So those kinds of things where you're managing to the exceptions, I think just increase the velocity of your production, right? Because you know where to focus and what to look at and what to let go, right?
Okay, good. Thank you. Jeff, have you had much turnover in your workforce this year?
Surprisingly, we really haven't. Well, not surprisingly, I guess. We made the decision early on that we weren't going to lay off a single employee. We decided to pay all of our employees, including the temporaries, believe it or not, that weren't even hired on. We paid them through the COVID shutdown. And so because of that, I think when we came back, we were able to retain just about everybody. We've had a few employees who haven't decided to come back, and for many cases, health reasons or other. But in terms of turnover, it's been surprisingly low. One of the challenges that we're having, however, is we're looking in certain spots to try to fill some need because of the influx in demand, and we're having a hard time filling some of those spots. But overall, our turnover has been very low.
Good. Okay. When did you install the ERP system? How long did it take? And did you experience any disruptions to your kind of day-to-day operations during the implementation process?
Yeah, so we implemented our system in late. So we started implementing in like mid 2015, and we went live in 2016. And for us, I was pleasantly surprised. I won't mention. I came from a Fortune 500 company that was using a Fortune 500 ERP system, and I had heard a lot of horror stories. I was a sales guy for that organization, and I was literally, there was a certain circumstance where I had to fly into my distribution warehouse to physically block parts from going to other customers. It was just a really hard deployment. And so coming here, I was in charge of a team that was implementing IQMS at the time, and we probably had a good solid 3 to 4 months of data gathering, data collection, data integrity, making sure all of our data was good. And then we probably had a good 3 to 4 months of where we're using, all systems. So we were using the IQMS Delmia Work system as well as our old legacy system. That was a little bit challenging, mostly for accounting. We had an accounting system. I wouldn't call it good or decent, but we didn't have much on the operations side. We were very much Excel spreadsheet and the plant manager going out and telling people what to make and when to make it. And so for the manufacturing side, it was actually a pretty easy implementation. For the accounting side, we had a dual. It was a little challenging, but no, I mean, we had no issues in our implementation in terms of customer satisfaction. In fact, the same year that we implemented IQMS, we were awarded the General Motors Supplier Excellence Award, and ironically, we've been awarded that Supplier Excellence Award every year since being on IQMS. So yeah, no, our customers, not only did they not see any issues, but it went the other way. We actually eliminated quite a few of our customer complaints. The limited complaints that we had all stemmed around labels and packing slips and bill of ladings and invoices, all and EDI transmissions, because we were hand typing all of those numbers. So you might have 200 to 300 numbers that we were asking our employees to type, And if one of those numbers that they typed were wrong, we would have a rejected EDI or a rejected invoice or a rejected label, and customers don't generally like that. And when we moved over to the system, it was just beautiful because there was no more typing, and when there's no more typing, the errors and the mistakes, quite literally get whittled down to maybe one or two a year, maybe. So it was great.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Jeff, how did you manage the changes on the production floor with the barcoding and the travelers and everything, all the change that your employees had to go through? How did you manage that, and any lessons learned you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, you know what? I think the biggest lesson learned, and one of the issues getting the management buy-in is, and they teach this in the classic schools, right? Is get the data hitting the system. If that data can be as close to the person doing the work as you can, the data itself is going to be better. I'm probably not saying that very effectively, but basically what we ended up doing is, it was kind of counterintuitive, but we actually empowered our people who are doing the work, the operators, the press operator, the grinder, the person operating the media finish room, and the person in shipping and receiving. We actually put the onus on them to be the ones using the barcode scanners, printing out the labels, production reporting, and having access to our system. It was a bit scary for the management team because it had been such a, I'll use the word top-down control that, in order for something to ship, the shipping clerk had to bring it to the office, and then the office had to generate the packing slips and the labels and the barcodes and put it into the invoicing system. Where now, when we go to ship something, the shipping clerk goes into the system and notifies what needs to ship, and based on that, they're the ones who are generating the EDI, they're generating the packing slip, they're generating the bill of lading, they're generating the labels and the master labels and the pallet labels, and getting rid of that control. The shipping department actually embraced it, and our operators in the press room actually loved it, because now all of a sudden they're feeling much more empowered because they've got the scanner and they've got the control. But then they also have to make sure that they're doing the correct inputs, because if they don't, all of a sudden we're having that conversation with them about, okay, well, what went wrong here? Why didn't this get entered right? Things like that. So all of a sudden that empowerment, I think, really helped with our employee engagement and morale. And then it also helped with the data integrity, because who knows better of what should be in the system than the person doing the work? I mean, for a person to stamp something in a room 3 rooms over, put it on a piece of paper, and then someone 3 rooms over in an office to type it into a production report, there's a lot of areas where that could go wrong. And once we made the move to Delmia Works, I mean, all of that, and we got it flushed out with the barcodes, all of those issues went away.
Okay, good. So you've got the production monitoring screen up here. You're using real time for that, right? When you're, I assume you're logging this production data and maybe doing daily summaries or weekly summaries. Is that logging and archiving? Is that done through real time, or is that done through the ERP system?
Yes, so it's done through real time, and it can also be done through production reporting. So what we've elected to do, in most companies would do it solely through real time. What we've elected to do, because we have so many different types of processes, not all of them are real time. For example, we've got a batch process, and we don't know how long that batch is going to need to be in. Some of the batches need to be in for an hour, some need to be in for 3 hours. It's very hard. It's not hard. You can't. It's impossible to do that using real time. So for us, what we've done is we use the real time as a tool, a green, yellow, red tool, just to determine, is that press running? How many cycles have we got? But we're not necessarily using that to drive our inventory positions, because of the complexity of the production that we do that's not capable of being on real time. And so the way that we're driving our inventory and our transactions for the archives is we're doing that through production reporting. But the real time has that capability to do that. It's a lot more streamlined if all of your processes are real time capable processes. Unfortunately for us, really only one or two are.
Okay. This question maybe for both of you guys. Jeff, maybe talk a little bit about how you kind of narrowed down your short list of ERP vendors. There's a lot of vendors out there. We all know that. So what were you looking for when you went through the selection process? And maybe, Tim, you can share a little bit of insight, too, on how companies can narrow down their shopping list of ERP vendors.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for me, what I started by doing is really just going after everybody. And this is probably not the most optimal way to do it, and Tim would probably be pulling his hair out right now, but I wanted to ask as many people and have a preliminary conversation, 30-minute to an hour kind of, I forget what they call it, but it's like a classification where they're figuring out if it's a fit and you're figuring out if it's a fit. And what I did is I interviewed quite a few. I mean, when I mean quite a few, 15 to 20 different companies I interviewed over the phone, and you can tell right away. So the first type of question that you want to ask yourself is, what type of manufacturer am I? Am I one of those manufacturers that, like, for example, I've got a part that we supply to one of our customers. We do about 1.5 million pieces a year, and we've supplied them that many pieces or more since 1979. Are you that type of manufacturer where when you secure business, you're likely going to have repeat order after repeat order after repeat order? Or are you one of those manufacturers where just because you got an order today for that product doesn't mean your tomorrow's product is going to be the same? And so figuring out that is most crucial, and some are both. And if you're both, it becomes very challenging to kind of optimize your ERP vendor. But then once you figure that out, as you're talking with the different ERP vendors, you kind of want to shove that in their face and say, okay, look, I'm a discrete manufacturer that has repeat business, and once I get one, it's pretty much the same every time. How does your system handle that? Or look, I'm a manufacturer and I don't know what I need to make in a week from now, because I don't know until it literally shows up at my dock and I've got to process it. And how can your system handle that? And it just allows you and the ERP vendor to understand each other much quicker. And you learn after quite a few of these interviews that the different salespeople get really, really squidgy when you talk one way or the other, because their product might be super optimized for that repetitive business, or it might be super optimized for that, kind of helter-skelter job shop type orders. So once you interview and do your due diligence, it usually gets narrowed down pretty quick.
Excellent. Good. I don't know, Tim, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I got a couple comments to that too, and I think Jeff is spot on. I mean, as far as matching the right ERP product with the manufacturing process of your business. The other thing I want to mention too is, many companies go to the internet to research, really even before they contact the ERP vendor themselves. So there's such good information out there, whether it's, case studies or video testimonials or even product demos, even on the various modules on YouTube, right? So there's a bunch of information that's out there. I think all along, and we've seen this from even some of the consulting organizations where they've made practices of, putting a selection steering committee together, and the consultants run that selection process. And it's almost, sometimes it's weighted to their favor because they may have a bench of resources that do the implementations for that particular vendor. So sometimes they may tilt the selection or the influence to perhaps somebody they have a bench for. But, I think in some cases, some of those selection consultants do a fantastic job. I think in some instances, and it's just like you see everywhere else, companies may milk that and try to get as much as they can, because they're consulting and they've got folks on the bench and they got to pay them and they're trying to get billable hours and all that kind of stuff. So, some are better than others. So I would certainly, use caution if you're going to go the selection consultant route. But generally, I would think, most of the information that you can gather, from the internet and from your own research should really cull you down to probably the top 3 players, from a solution perspective. And I think if you go beyond 3 that you're evaluating, and again, you may start with 5 or 7, but you narrow it down through your research, and then you bring it down to 3 that you're going to run through the motions with, from a discovery process and demos and all of that. It's difficult on the organization to do more than that, because you get into points where, what did we see last? And we've spent so much time, and we've gone through these same steps over and over and over again. And the worst thing that happens, and I've seen this, is you go through that evaluation process, and then you've taken 10 months to review everybody, and then you get to the end and you decide not to make a decision, right? So what have you done? You've invested all that time and you've not really, come to the end.
Right.
Just one more comment on that too. And for most, ERP companies who have integrity and the salespeople who represent them, they want to make sure the relationship is solid, because ERP is a life. Companies change their ERP systems maybe once every 12 years, and some hang on to them well longer than that, right? So you want to make sure you have a good, solid relationship with that company kind of going forward. And good way to get feedback on that is talk to those references, of those companies who've deployed that technology and that software.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Great point, Tim.
All right, we're at the top of the hour. We do have one more question. We'll go ahead and pose it to you, Jeff. It has to do with your GM Supplier of the Year recognition, and you made a kind of a direct relationship to the ERP, helping you kind of develop that relationship with GE or with GM to get you that recognition. Talk about your relationship with GM and how it's changed with the onset of this ERP system and their perception of your organization as a supplier.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. For us, we've always had a really, really great relationship with GM. And so I think the ERP system just really helped kind of solidify the customer touch points. And I think I alluded to it a little bit during the presentation, but one of the concerns or complaints that all of our customers, including General Motors, would have is, we'd make these parts and we make millions of them that we could hold tolerances, plus or minus a half a thou or 4/10, no problem. But then we need to call it part number 1, 2, 3, and we were accidentally calling it part number 1, 2, 4. And so even though we were doing that great job on the production side, it was those administrative issues, the labeling, the packing slip, bill of lading, invoicing, customer labels, mixed labels, master labels, all of EDI and ASN transmissions. It was all of that type of work where I think we were falling down. And so what happened is during the time of implementing the ERP system is the folks that were doing the work, our shipping and receiving department, they were now the ones responsible for getting all the right information, and they no longer had to type it. The system would auto retrieve based on what that customer demand was. So the customer demand would come in for all of these parts. The shipping and receiving clerk would put those from releases into the pallet builder, and then as that pallet's being built, the system already knows the right information to put on the label and the packing slip and the weights and the invoicing amounts and all of that information. And so all of a sudden, all of these customer touch points, which used to be our Achilles heel, now are streamlined with this almost automatic and seamless information transfer. And so it's really helped us to strengthen our relationship in terms of, getting the right information. And then the other thing that it did is it allowed us to be able to just about double our capacity, because we're able to leverage our assets both on the labor as well as the equipment side to figure out, okay, what do we need to buy as we start to do this bottleneck analysis using the system. We're able to spend limited amount of resources to increase equipment capacity, and then once you do that in the right spots, I would say we've over doubled our capacity for this place with a very small investment, and most of that is attributed to IQMS and the Delmia works. Wow. And so when you have double the amount of capacity and a customer that wants to grow with you, I promise you it's a really good measure of success.
Sure. That's very impressive. Okay, well, we've reached the end of our time period here, so I'll take this opportunity to thank Tim and Jeff very much for their outstanding and informational presentation, and thank our attendees, of course, for spending some time with us as well. We hope you found it to be valuable. Again, an archive of the program will be available on our website within the next couple of days, and when it's ready, you'll get an email from us, and then you'll be able to review it again and maybe share it with others in your organization. So, again, thank you for joining us today. Thanks to Tim and Jeff. You can go ahead and close your browsers now, and I wish everybody a good afternoon.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you.